Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Aisha Subarkash. Israel has ordered the evacuation of more than 1 million people in northern Gaza, a demand the United Nations has called impossible and, if attempted, would have devastating consequences. Gaza has been cut off from all humanitarian aid, water, food, and its only power station shut down after running out of fuel. Israel has made it clear that no aid will be provided until Hamas releases the more than 100 hostages it is believed to be holding. Israeli airstrikes continue to pound multiple targets across Gaza, leaving the enclave's health facilities on the brink of collapse. On Thursday, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken landed in Tel Aviv, where he met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, pledging continued U.S. support. Meanwhile, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has called on all parties to act with restraint as he held several phone calls with world leaders. Last week, Hamas launched a daring surprise attack into southern Israel. Several days of fighting and intense Israeli airstrikes have killed more than 1,500 people in Gaza. And now to discuss the massive humanitarian crisis in the region and the initial de-escalation efforts of international actors. Joining me now from Washington, D.C. is William Lawrence. He's a former U.S. diplomat, and Zaha Hassan. She is a human rights attorney and a fellow at Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. A warm welcome to you both, and thanks for joining me on Straight Talk. So, Zaha, Israel has given evacuation orders of northern Gaza. The UN called the evacuation order impossible. How disastrous would an evacuation of over 1 million people be?
I think we need to keep the perspective here that there's just over 2 million people that reside in Gaza. So the evacuation of 1 million people south at a time when there is absolutely no space in any part of the country to house these people. There are no facilities in terms of hospital care that you can transfer these patients that are in the north. And bear in mind that the largest hospital is in the north, in Gaza City. And moving these patients, some of them critical patients, obviously there's been hundreds and hundreds of casualties, over 6,000 casualties that are being treated in various parts of the north and south. And to think that you could move these people, including babies that are in neonatal care facilities, to the south is just impossible.
So, William, although it's fluid, but how do you see the current situation in the region? I mean, what does Israel want to achieve, especially with this latest evacuation order?
Well, let me start by saying, as the non-lawyer on the panel, it's also illegal what Israel's asking the Gazans to do, in addition to impossible and calamitous, which is what the UN said. But the overall goal here is to try to create circumstances in which this will never happen again. I think most experts on the region would say that the sustainable way to reach an end game where this will never happen again is to address root causes, right, and to address the fears and the grievances of both sides. This is the opposite. This is increasing fear. This is escalating. This is likely to create, even if it eliminates Hamas, which is possible. I think a lot of people are saying it's not possible. It's possible. If you kill enough Gazans, you could eliminate Hamas temporarily. But Hamas 2.0 would probably come back even more ferociously. So it's an unsustainable way. And the thing that, as a professor, perhaps disturbs me the most is how bigoted the language is. As you hear, how bloodthirsty Hamas is, it's often couched in bloodthirsty language. And this means there's little chance these Israelis will turn around right now.
So, Zaha, on the other hand, Turkey and several other regional countries like Egypt and Qatar have been contacting regional leaders to push for de-escalation. Are you hopeful that there is going to be any progress on that front?
I think there's an important role to play by the regional actors to help get us to a ceasefire, get us to preventing what looks like a ground invasion coming in the next hours or so. Unfortunately, we have a United States position that is not in favor of a ceasefire. In fact, the U.S. has been really giving full-throated support for whatever Israel has to do. There have been tweets about refraining from retaliatory actions that have gotten deleted from State Department sites. There have been calls by journalists for the State Department to say that denying people food and water and essential services is wrong, is illegal, and the State Department refused to say that. So I think all signals are that the U.S. is going to support Israel. And I mean, we don't have to think about signals. I mean, the Secretary of State said it very clearly.
Yes.
The U.S. is with Israel, come what may.
Yes. So as you've said, William, Blinken during his meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu on Thursday said, quote, "We're here and we're not going anywhere." What does he mean by that?
He means that in every way imaginable, the U.S. will stand shoulder to shoulder with Israel, even if it violates what Blinken and Biden also said, which is that Israel should follow the rules of war. But we're past that now when it comes to war crimes. When you're talking about the killing of 404 children, or whatever the latest number is, 440 children as of yesterday, that's not a proportional response. That's not even an ethical response. So I've been saying it for years, and I said it again this week many times, one side's war crimes doesn't justify the other side's war crimes. And then from a tactical or strategic perspective, which is where my colleague on the panel here has been coming from, it's just not going to work either. And so, I'm not always against war. I'm for example, arming the Ukrainians to defend themselves. War is awful, but it's not necessarily the only way, just should be avoided at all costs. Mm-hmm. In this particular case, though, any scenario, I think, makes things worse, short and long term. And so, as Zara said, I'm not sure the ceasefire will come first. I think maybe a negotiation towards a prisoner exchange. Turkey's offered. Qatar's already done some spade work here. The Egyptians and others have talked about a prisoner swap. But with, for example, 1,200 Palestinians currently in jail with no charges, and women and children among them, a swap is possible if only we could pause this escalation towards war and think about the humans involved.
So efforts are underway, Zaha. Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan is in Egypt today to meet his Egyptian counterpart. So the question is, could Turkey, Qatar and Egypt coordinate efforts to cease hostilities? And what options do they have to offer to both sides to end this violence?
Well, look, I think that the biggest obstacle is going to be Israel in this. I think Israel has made quite clear that they want to see the complete dismantling of Hamas in Gaza. And the way that they see to do that is by destroying Gaza and making it impossible for Hamas to operate there. And it seems to not matter to the Israeli government how many casualties that will mean for civilians. And in fact, much of the infrastructure that's been taken down, especially in the early days, telecommunications, the targeting of journalists, the hitting of hospitals and shelters. I mean, these are all indications that Israel is not just out for, eliminating Hamas, but it's out for sort of ending the problem of Gaza, which is having to deal with the continued population there and the needs of that population, as Israel is the occupying power and is responsible not just for the safety of its own civilians, it's responsible for the safety of Palestinian civilians who are still under occupation under international law. Yes. Gaza is still occupied territory. And so the idea that Israel has been working on is moving the Palestinian population into the Sinai. Yes. And there have been discussions with the Egyptians about this very issue, and they have been strongly against that as an option. Obviously, they don't want to see, their sovereignty compromised by having a new refugee population in the Sinai, particularly one that has, Hamas within its midst. And so So we're faced with this dilemma right now. Who is going to be the adult in the room that can help pull back both the United States and Israel? And I just don't think that Israel is of the mindset right now to listen to this
Yes.
kind of advice.
So, William, Netanyahu has said Israel's retaliation against Hamas will change the Middle East forever. What do you think he was hinting at, and what would a prolonged conflict mean for the regional balances?
Well, it sounds a little bit like the rhetoric when the U.S. invaded Iraq, which was also probably illegal. And they said it would change the Middle East forever, and it did, for the worse. Helped create ISIS, et cetera, et cetera. So, notwithstanding the fact that my Iraqi fans loved the fact that Saddam Hussein was taken out, it took hundreds of thousands of deaths and chaos and mayhem and destruction to get there, and it was sustainable only with great difficulty and re-interventions by the international community. This is a little bit different. I mean, there's no love lost between Biden and Netanyahu. In the 2021 war, the U.S. managed to shorten it to about 3 weeks, when the Israelis probably would have wanted to go 2 to 3 months, with commensurate increase in killing and destruction. And what's kind of frightening in the rhetoric right now is they're saying we don't want to occupy, right? And yet we need to eliminate a problem which is again centered around people living on land. So it's kind of scorched earth in some respects. It's clearing the area of everybody in it by starting by asking 1 million people to walk south. Now, the Israelis did walk that back a little bit last night. They said, we're only talking about Gaza, and we're going to try to make it possible for people to get out. But I think actions speak louder than words. And, right now, if you go to a field, or if you go to the beach, or if you go to a farm in Gaza, you're still a target.
Yes. So Zaha, very quickly, please, if this current conflict likely to spread to other parts of the Palestinian territories, like the occupied West Bank or occupied East Jerusalem, and maybe a wider region?
Look, today is Friday, and it's a day of rage and a day where people go to the mosque to congregate. There is already, in the last week, there have already been Palestinian deaths at the hands of Israeli military. And when we see these images that we're seeing in the Arab world of what's taking place in Gaza, you can only expect that it's going to enrage people and want to protest, want to see their own governments respond in some strong way.
Yes. And
so I do think there is a very high risk here, looking at the devastating decimation of Gaza already, that we're going to see other actors enter into the fray here. And definitely the West Bank was already on fire before. This was what led to, according to Hamas, their attack on Israel, was the incredible amount of violence, particularly settler violence, in coordination with Israeli military cover. So I think there is a high degree of likelihood we're going to see escalation in the West Bank, and it's looking more and more likely that we might see some engagement in the north and from Hezbollah in Lebanon.
All right. Zaha and William, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.